Jason Kenney undermines democracy by firing an election watchdog amid an investigation. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Jason Kenney is the Premier of Alberta. He's also the leader of the United Conservative Party provincially. On top of that, he's known for his stances against things like the carbon tax, his support of the oil industry, and most recently, ethics scandals. So here's another figure to keep in mind. Lorne Gibson. He was the Alberta Election Commissioner. Note the was. He's not that anymore because Kenney fired him. This guy, Lorne Gibson, his job was essentially to ensure that no funny business happens during an election. Recently, this ex-commissioner launched an investigation into the United Conservative Party to check up on some alleged wrongdoings. One of the accusations against the party was the usage of a kamikaze candidate. To put that simply, picture a puppet candidate who doesn't really want to win. He's only there to work together with another candidate to undermine a competitor. This kamikaze candidate comes in handy in relation to things like election funding laws. They limit the impact a single candidate can have, but when you have two people playing on the same team, you can increase your budget and increase your odds. It's against the principles of a democracy and lets you bypass these election laws that we've set up, so it's a pretty serious accusation, and the commissioner was trying to investigate whether or not Jason Kenney, the premier, had ties to this happening, because it was pretty much established that that's what happened. But they were trying to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle. So the commissioner already imposed fines against some of the people associated with the alleged kamikaze candidate, people who funded him. Lots of questions were being asked, and fines were being dished out. But recently, he changed his focus. As I mentioned, he wanted to investigate the premier to see if he could establish a connection there. So Jason Kenney catches wind of that, and he responds by firing the commissioner while the investigation is being conducted. Seems pretty sketchy, right? He's effectively trying to shut down the investigation that's being conducted against himself. That is an insane amount of power to have. To be able to shut down a probe because you just want to, that is overstepping your bounds as the premier, and even if Kenney is allowed to, he shouldn't have done it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So let's try and think about Kenney right now and try to figure out why he would shut down this probe. Why would he shut down an inquiry into his potential association with these kamikaze candidate accusations? In the first scenario, let's assume that he's not guilty. Why would you fire the commissioner then? If you're truly not guilty, let the commissioner do his work, and he'll find out, if he does his job properly, that you are not involved. He'll be free to go. But by that same token, if he's not guilty, and he fires the commissioner, you immediately cast a shadow of doubt upon yourself. You don't look good by doing that. People like me, people like the media, people like your constituents are wondering why you would go to such extreme lengths just to cover something up if you're not guilty in the first place. It makes no sense. For Kenney to put himself under such public scrutiny, there would have to be a perceived gain here. He wouldn't do it for no reason, and it's not like he didn't think things through. He's the premier. He's obviously a smart guy. And if not for him, he has advisors and he has a team behind him. This was a calculated move, and to assume that he did it willy-nilly without thinking about the consequences is not plausible. He knew he'd be getting into hot water, but he deemed it worth it because of what he would be gaining, and that is the removal of the investigation probe. Here's the other possibility now, and we assume that he's guilty. Him firing the commissioner makes a lot of sense in that case, because if it's found out that he was using these kamikaze candidates and he was tied up in breaking election laws, that could undermine his legitimacy as the Premier of Alberta. That's not something he would want, and on the converse side of that, if he is guilty and he allows the commissioner to do his job, he's in danger of all those things coming true. So it makes sense for him to fire the guy who's leading a path to his destruction. No matter how you slice it, this is terrible. If you want to be optimistic, at the very least you have to acknowledge that this is shady. And in the worst case scenario, it's that he's guilty of the crimes he's trying to hide from. And on top of that, it's not just about firing the commissioner either. He has every right to do that, but it's the timing. You could have fired this guy at any point. If you didn't like him because you felt like he was a bad candidate, he was incompetent, he was not doing his job properly, you had so long to do that. But you choose to fire him the second he launches an investigation into you, not before, not after, but during, it's inexcusable behavior. It looks highly suspicious and it indicates an ulterior motive. For him to put himself through massive public scrutiny, for everyone to be talking about it, he would not have done that if he did not think it was the right thing to do. And the only way it's the right thing to do is if you are guilty. Now, Alberta's Ethics Commission put out a statement on this. They say that anyone under investigation by the province's election commissioner would be in a conflict of interest if they voted on a bill to remove them. Obviously, it does not take an ethics commissioner to tell you that. That is the obvious truth of it. If somebody launches an investigation into you, and your immediate response is to fire them, try to undermine them, and get rid of them, that's very mafia-esque. You don't even try to put up a defense of your position. Your immediate response is to get rid of the guy. That's horrible. Anybody with any sense would come to that same conclusion that the ethics commissioner came to. Kenney is not stupid either, and he knew this. He knew that he was going to fire that guy and receive the backlash. He didn't think it was going to be perfectly in line. Everyone's going to be okay with it. He knew, yet he still did it. I'm going to say it again. The perceived reward of his action must have been worth it. We don't know to what extent that he was guilty of in these accusations. We don't even know for sure if he is, but he's leaving a trail here, and it's making it seem like he was. He would not do that if he didn't have anything to cover up. So here's how we got rid of the commissioner. They passed a bill. It was called Bill 22, and that was the ticket to issue the termination of the commissioner and his position. Not just get rid of the guy, he actually dismantled the entire role. The provincial opposition party urged the process to be halted. They wanted more time to review the documents, and they did not want that bill to pass so quickly, but it proceeded despite that. Jason Kenney's government ensured time limits around the different levels of the debates prior to passing the bill. They wanted it to pass ASAP. So, it's clear, delaying the bill was not an option for them. They needed the issue to be gone immediately. Typically, the government takes forever to pass motions, but these guys got it done in a hurry. In less than 24 hours of debate time, it happened. It's great to see how fast the government can really move when they are motivated. When the Premier is motivated by his potential connection to a criminal offense, they get things done really fast in that situation. So, the bill is a little bit more dastardly, as I alluded to, than simply firing the current commissioner. It changes the entire nature of the role, and this is another piece of evidence that goes against Kenney. If he was going to say the commissioner is biased or the commissioner is corrupt, he's coming at me with an ulterior motive and I don't trust him, that's fine. Fire him and hire a new commissioner at the very least. But Kenney took it a step further. He destroyed the position. What happened is it turned the job into a staff position under the chief electoral officer, and before that, it was actually an independent office. This means that now that's become a job under people that he controls. That commissioner is not going to be free to do their own investigations under their independent authority now. It's so obvious. The only reason you would issue a decree like that is to keep the future commissioners in line. By making them staff, the firing process is far easier than it would be if they were an independent body. To get rid of an independent body, you would need to do what they just did here. They would have to pass a bill. They pulled a rabbit out of a hat this time by making it go through fast, but them doing it again, it's unlikely. The opposition is aware of it now, and the media is in tune with it, so they have to think outside the box. With this new ruling, the electoral officer, who the commissioner will now work under, can simply remove them at a whim. You're fired, that's it, we don't need to pass a bill. That's dastardly. You got rid of the guy, you got rid of the position, all because they launched an inquiry into you. How much more guilty can you look? And now Kennedy might come to the defense of that and say, oh, we didn't get rid of it. What are you talking about? We just moved it here. That is the same thing as draining it of all its power. You've taken an independent officer and made them a staff subject to someone who you supposedly have influence over. You can't be investigating yourself, and that's what he's trying to do here. The position, as far as I'm concerned, is void now. Now, fundamentally, I'm a firm believer in democratic values, and this here is an injustice to the process. They have manipulated the government system and configured it to fit their personal interests. They are blatantly hiding corruption via further corruption. The federal government needs to come down on them hard. He has to call in the Alberta Premier and use the courts to bring him to justice. They have to launch a probe into the matter and pursue the investigation left behind by the previous commissioner. It's unacceptable if we let this go as it is. I would even take this bill to the highest courts and get it struck down for violating basic democratic principles. You cannot be firing people because they launched an investigation into your election. That's not how we do it here. We are not an authoritarian regime. With the new proposed way that Kenney has come up with, the commissioner is basically working under him. You can't have an elections commissioner working that closely to the party they are investigating. They will be subjected to undue fear of losing their job every time they want to look into something that bothers the premier. This is a path to totalitarianism. It's completely shameful behavior from an elected official. Kenney, at the same time, should not be underestimated. He has thought this through very deeply, and even now, he still sits very pretty because he knows the following. He is a professional politician. He's fully aware of the climate in Alberta, and that will likely allow him to get away with this. That there is a single-party province. They vote Conservative, and that's the tradition. Kenney masquerades as helping the people under the guise of conservatism, but he's really just subjugating the masses under that shield. He knows the people are opposed to kicking him out of office because a Liberal or NDP premier is undesirable. He's forcing that upon the masses and playing to their ideological presuppositions. It's either you get the corrupt Kenney, who might help the oil industry because he is a conservative premier, or the alternative, the Liberal or the NDP options, who will almost surely hinder that same oil industry. To a family who relies heavily on that sector to make a living, it's a hard choice, and he knows that. He also knows they're likely to make that sacrifice and keep him around, especially because he knows this too. Nothing's been officially proved yet. Even though he's acting shady as a shadow and all the evidence is pointing towards him trying to cover something up, it's not official. I have to admit that, and he's going to play that card. At the same time, my other alternative to this is to get the federal government to come down on him, but he knows that Trudeau is afraid. Alberta is a very conservative province. If Trudeau comes in and tries to body their premier, they might not like that. Trudeau, one of his goals was to establish better relations with those western provinces. Him coming in and trying to establish dominance, even if for a good reason, may not be well received, is going to make Trudeau think about it. I think it's justified, and I think Trudeau has to step up to the challenge right now, but Kenney, he might be banking that Trudeau backs down. I think that's possible, actually, and it's unfortunate. These are all the intricacies of politics, and it's getting pretty nasty. The commissioner gave a quote following his removal, and he states that democratic election processes require mechanisms for identification of violations of election rules and the resolution of complaints regarding alleged violations. Participants who seek to violate or take unfair advantage of these rules must be held accountable for actions that cross legal and ethical lines. That is 100% correct, and if I was in this position, I'd be very livid as well, getting fired for doing my job, and unjustly at that, being fired by a seemingly corrupt man. Kenney's actions are simply unacceptable, and I urge Trudeau and the federal government to not go along with this. They have to bring in the Supreme Courts and strike him down. Kenney has not even provided any type of reasonable rationale trying to explain why he's done what he did. That indicates to me that he doesn't have any, because there isn't. It's just bona fide corruption. As far as I'm concerned, he's proven that he's unfit for office. And I do have to say something about the current state of corruption. The media has made that word a buzzword. Everything is corruption, everything is corrupt, and I can't help but feel that we've entered a sort of boy who cried wolf situation. This here is a bona fide example. There's nothing else you can say. It's simply corruption. You can't fire people because they choose to investigate you as part of their job. You can't destroy the role either and subjugate it to unfair pressures, making sure that nobody is willing to cross you ever again. That is authoritarian in nature. But we've tossed around the word corruption so willy-nilly, so casually, that when people see it in the headlines now, they think, oh, it's something light. Well, here is an example of when it's not. People have to take it more seriously because this is a major injustice happening in our country. No self-respecting man of democratic values would have taken the path that Kenney has. It's a shame, and it's truly worrisome that there is a possibility that nothing happens here. If that's the case, People will lose faith in the system because this is unacceptable, and I implore the federal government to step in here because it is sorely needed. So, that brings me to the end of today's discussion. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow our show. At the same time, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.